It is now time to begin the session organized by IMD. The session will focus on the theme, Governance for Peace, Lessons from the Public and Private Sectors. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers. Dr. Seiichiro YONEKURA, the Dean, Hiroshima Business Management School, HBMS. Professor Salvatore, Mr. Dr. Takeshi Takatsu, Managing Director, Northeast Asia, IMD, and the Professor of Finance, IMD, Professor Salvatore CANTALE. We wanted to have these three distinguished guests to the stage. For this session, Dr. Takatsu will serve as the moderator. Professor Takatsu, the floor is yours.
And thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Naoshi, and I'm really delighted to be here today with Professor YONEKURA and my dear colleague Salvatore CANTALE. So the way we thought that we would construct this session, and also the theme of our discussion will be governance. We're going to discuss governance because governance matters. And so we're going to discuss the governance of international institution, but also private sector, and what we can learn from each other. And maybe for you, maybe you are representative in different ways of a corporation or organization or international corporations and all that. And then you can maybe think about the way your business is run, your business is governed, and also the objective of your business, how they are aligned. So that would be the purpose of this discussion. We would like to invite you at one point to really, discuss maybe with your neighbors about this idea of the governance of your organization, right? And then we have Salvo talking about his ideas, and then also Professor YONEKURA talking about his ideas to address these issues. But before going into the content, let's talk about a little bit about Hiroshima. Professor YONEKURA, you were not born in Hiroshima, you were not raised in Hiroshima, but you're now living in Tokyo, but you teach in Hiroshima, right?
Yes, as you mentioned, I was born in Tokyo, raised up in Tokyo, so I do not have any relation with Hiroshima.
Yeah.
But my predecessor, Mr. Yokoyama, unfortunately passed away last April, and then Governor Yuzaki came to my office in Tokyo, and I did a bad hunch at that time. And he asked me to take over Mr. Yokoyama's position as a dean. But I'm a very weak person. I couldn't decline his offer, and I came to here. So at that time, I didn't have any idea why Hiroshima.
Right.
But I found this year's the 80th anniversary of the bombing. And I found a kind of my fate. I'm not a religious person, but why I came here last year, because I have to do something, and I have to say something from Hiroshima as one citizen of Japan. That's the reason why I'm teaching at the Hiroshima Business School. And I'm a dean of the Hiroshima.
It's a true honor to have you, Professor YONEKURA, because he has been very well known in Japan as the authority of Japanese management, innovation, etc. So I'm sure that he's going to share us a lot of insights and would challenge maybe my colleague Salvatore CANTALE, who is going to introduce himself right now. You are Italian, you're living in Switzerland, you come to Japan, this is your first visit to Hiroshima.
Yes.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
So first time in Hiroshima. I just arrived yesterday night. It's really humbling to go around. We went this morning for a walk. And so I'm really overwhelmed in this moment. But that says that there's even more reason for me to be here. So thank you so much for the organizers and to you, Naoshi, to having me here. I think it's a good discussion. I will tell later that I really believe that the structure informs discussion. So this idea of having maybe a different governance structure for different organizations, I think is very important, especially for such an important topic as global peace.
Yes, indeed. We had a chance this morning to visit the Peace Memorial Museum near the epicenter of the atomic bomb, and it was a very humbling experience.
So absolutely, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let us move to the discussion. And then, Salvo, you have some story to share to us.
Absolutely.
Right?
Just so, once again, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to talk of such an important topic as governance and governance of what I say, public institutions, right? I've been working, it's 30 years that I've been working with companies, and I've been working with boards from many different private companies. And lately, in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, I've been working also with boards of non-private company, with large non-government agencies. And I think it's important to me to actually look at what are the differences in this decision-making, and differences in the structure of decision-making and the outcome of what comes later. I'm going to be using an example throughout this little talk, and which is the World Health Organization. And I will do so not because I think that the organization is not run in the best way possible, because at some level I think that it is run in a very good way, but just to actually highlight the difference between the way in which a non-governmental organization is run versus a more standard private company, the one that I used to work. And of course, when we talk about World Health Organization, we have to go back to COVID. This is the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about this, and the kind of reaction that the World Health Organization had in that particular situation. I don't know if you remember, we start hearing about the population, me for that matter. I start hearing about COVID in the late November 2019. There was the stories coming from Wuhan and the difficulties and really the emergency that over there. And yet we had to wait until the 14th of January for the World Health Organization to actually come up with their own statement. And their own statement was kind of interesting because on January 14th, 2020, I'm talking about 2020, they were talking about no clear evidence of human-to-human possible spreading of the disease. We had to wait until January 30 to actually talk about the emergency of a possible pandemic, and March 11 for the actual declaration of the pandemic. And by March 11, everybody actually knew what was going on at that time. It was obvious to everybody, and this is the moment in which they come up. What they were supposed to do, it's easy to say ex post, there was a pandemic, it's their fault. Obviously, it was not their fault, but what was on their plate, so to speak? Well, their plate was very simple. They should have coordinated their research. They should have, as they did, maybe not as quickly as I want them to do, but they did, and they had to coordinate a sort of global response to the pandemic. That didn't work. What they should have done, and this delayed risk communication, something which is standard in companies. This is standard in companies, at least within the scope and the boundaries of the organization, and they didn't. And this is very interesting because they come up with this pandemic, right? On the January the 30 was the emergency, and the pandemic on March 11. But we know that there were already financial instruments issued by the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development in 2017. I'm not kidding. In 2017, we already had documents, was a pandemic bond issued by this organization in which some of the triggers of the pandemic bond was coronavirus. 2017. The bond has a 3 years tenure, 3-year maturity, with maturity somewhere in July 2020. So to some extent, some people at least, knew that there was the risk of the pandemic. There was a document done by Swiss Re, which is a large reinsurance company in Switzerland about the risk of the pandemic, and one of these risks was coronavirus, very well modeled, all right, with all the distribution and everything, statistical distribution, and this was something that somehow didn't reach us until many, many months or years later, so to speak. Unfortunately, there was no enforcement mechanism, but this is part of the World Health Organization. They have not the power to enforce whatever they say, and of course, they have very much fragmented coordination. This is a little bit the scope, so there's nothing wrong about that. This is a bit scope of the institution, but if you actually look at the structure, at the governance structure of the World Health Organization, you understand why maybe sometimes the decisions are not as quick as we would like them to be, as pragmatic as they should be. The World Health Assembly, which is the large governance body, is done by 194 countries with 194 individuals, I guess. The executive board, which is what in a two-tier system in corporate governance for private companies we would call the board of directors, is done by 34 people. That is 34. That is 34 people, and these are elected for 3 years, and they meet twice a year, right? So on the job for 3 years, and they meet twice a year. And the executive board, what we would call in a company, well, the executive team, so to speak, is done by 6 people, all right? And of course, you cannot not make the difference between what happens, what could happen, I've never been in one of the meetings, what could happen in some of the discussions which is done at that level, right, with respect to the kind of discussion which is done in a more standard two-tier board structure in a private company, right? For a private company, in general, we know that the number of board of directors, the average number of board of directors in a Russell 3000 company, 3000 is basically a big database, is about 9 people. And what we know is that as long as there is a higher number of board of directors, the quality of the discussion and the quality of the decision decreases. To some extent, if I had to translate it, I would say there is a little bit of a boundary in a number of people that can actually be in a discussion, at least in a board of a private company, okay? And we know that the higher the number of board of directors, the lower is the financial performance of the company. This is something that we know from data. We know also from data that in general, boards are organized in committees. That is, since it's very difficult to actually make some interesting discussion when there's many, many people in the room, then the board delegates some of the discussion, not the decision-making, but at least the discussion. The discussion is done in smaller committee. Let's say we have a ESG or sustainability committee, all right? Generally speaking, in a board, which on average is done by 9 people, there is a smaller committee that is a group of people from the board that basically are asked to talk about that particular topic, to make the research on that particular topic, and eventually to address the board about what they found during the thing. And we know that, for numbers, so once again, that the higher the number of committee, the lower is the effectiveness of the financial performance of the company, with the optimal number of committee, which is up to 6. More than 6 committees, we have a little bit of problem. The decision is done by consensus in board. So you understand, how difficult must it be to put together 34 minds within the World Health Organization. And once again, it's just by structure, so to speak. It's not about the quality of the people, which is, of course, the highest. It's just the structure. As I said before, structure inform discussion, structure inform decision. And this is why I think this is very important. Mm-hmm. All right? So.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Professor YONEKURA. Would you like to start your presentation, or would you like to ask Sarva some questions?
Okay, first of all, I'll do my presentation.
Yeah.
And
then we can exchange ideas.
Professor CANTALE, thank you very much. As he talked about the WHO, the World Organization, but I'd like to talk about particularly UN and the peace maintenance function. And because I am a professor of innovation, so from the point of view of innovation, we need the innovation in a large international organization, or non-public private organization, I believe. And so in this line, I believe the business and the global organization can learn from each other. And many of you do unexpectedly, those countries are adopting the capitalism. And the capitalism is now under a severe criticism. But still, I am pro capitalism because capitalism has a power. And why those countries adopted the capitalism? Because in 1979, Deng Xiaoping gave up the communism. And in 1989, Gorbachev also gave up the socialism. Why? Because socialism or communism is very good at distributing wealth, but cannot create the wealth itself. Only capitalism can create. But the problem is that this system, capitalism, left the huge gaps between haves and have-nots. And in my word, innovators and non-innovators. But why capitalism can create wealth? Because the core of the system based on innovation and competition. So my point is, for example, I like this figure, and the central government, okay, can order, okay, make 1 ton of nails and plan the economy. And yes, it's possible like this way. It's 1 ton of nail, but never think about the customers. Well, capitalism always detecting customers' need and also creates new products, service that never exist before. This is a core of the development, evolution. But as I mentioned, the gaps between haves and have-nots. And the issue is the widening and fixing. As many of you noticed, only 5% of people control 80% of wealth of this growth. But still, innovation and competition is the power of the creation of new things. And I was given this topic, and then I found, as you mentioned, structural change we need. How to introduce the competition among the international organization like a UN. How to introduce the innovative mindset to those people. So probably we need some, same as the WHO, they have to rely on some private institutions like the laboratories or so many institutions in the world. But they try to rely on very internal resources and very hard decision-making process. And in order to do so, we need the diversity. The diversity is the source of innovation, as you know. The last 20 years, why Japan stagnated? Because we lack a kind of diversity. And so how to, as you mentioned, the UN, those international organizations created years ago, almost 70 years ago, and never changed the same structure. But we have to bring the new structure for this, to create the innovation and also competitiveness, and not only competition among themselves. That is my, and also we should provide incentive scheme for public organization. How come? Public organization is the independent and very common sharing based on commons, but should we provide incentive for innovation for those kind of organizations? But I think yes. How to design the incentives, not only financial, but how to effective. Many of you, same, they're facing the TV and unbelievable massacre in Gaza. Okay, people are dying and were killed by, the bombs in Ukraine. Why we cannot stop in this 21st century? Right? Why we have to see the TVs with very helpless emotion? But we have to do something to create, to function the global issue, even the global warming and war, conflicts. And in order to do so, we need some structural change, and also we need courage to tackle with the new agenda, to create something new. That is my...
これが私の考察でございます。このトピックで私が着記された考察であります。先ほど WHO の話がございました。これは意思決定機関のプロセスだけではなく、この競合イノベーションの設計、そしてまた
things that they can, or international organization can learn from the private or business sectors. That is my presentation.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor YONEKURA. One word that came to me after hearing both presentations is the diversity of models. We have diversity of models of capitalism, for example. The Chinese capitalism, Russian capitalism, Japanese capitalism, American capitalism are all different because of the social fabric and all that. And so you talked about WHO, you compared it with the benchmark of the, like a corporate sector. And then you also said that the structure rules the decision, right? But also the goals or objective of the organization would define the structure, right? Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Absolutely. So thank you for the question. What I meant is that it's too easy to say that some public organizations are not so efficient. But I think I want to be a little bit more careful in my statements. And why? Because private organizations, generally speaking, we have one goal, which I can summarize with maximizing profits. And it looks like to push forward this big boat is a little bit easier when we know exactly what is the North Star and we are moving in that direction. So since structure informed discussions and then decisions, I think it's just more logical to think that the kind of decision-making and governance in order to reach that objective is a little bit simpler, right? It's simplified just because it's a simpler objective, so to speak. Now, of course, I don't believe for a second that the only objective of a company is to maximize profits. And I don't think that, any non-psychopathic person would think like, the same. There's much more that, companies can do and actually do in society. But in the moment in which you make a little bit of complexity in the goals, let's say lately with sustainability, sometimes we call it ESG, then you understand how just putting a little bit less focus on the objectives of the corporations make the whole discussion way more complex, the whole governance way more complex, and the decision-making less clear-cut. So when we talk about peace, right, which is the objective of this stuff, you understand like how much more complex the problem is and how much more subtle and articulate the governance of this governing body should be. So I'm not, but still, that said, I think there is something that non-government organization can learn from the public sector, right? You know, this idea like, you know, organizing about committees, you know, the crisis escalation committees, which is obvious in large companies, right? And non-existent in some organizations. Why not? I mean, we know that that works. We know that these are best practices. Why not borrow some of the things and actually bring it, you know, to the fruition of everybody? We used to say, this is Latin, so many years ago, even before me, my hair are very white, but the Romans would say, si vis pacem, para bellum. That is, if you want the peace, prepare for war. Lately, much later, it was like, that was not very well said. If si vis pacem, para pacem, if you want the peace, prepare for peace. And this is, I think, where our structures and institutions should go, like preparing the peace in order to actually world which is a little bit more peaceful, so to speak.
Professor Yonekura, you may have some reaction.
Yes, now the devil's advocate now. And as you mentioned, the private sector, they have the very simpler goal compared with the global matter. But I dare to say the peace, simple. Okay? Stop the pandemic, simple. Compared with the making profit, so many the stakeholders to see. This is my first reaction. The public sector is the much more complex. They have to tackle with. The private sector is much simpler. But I feel the opposite. Okay, the goal is simple: stop the war now. Okay, the peace now. Stop the pandemic. And then why those large organizations as UN, WHO cannot do this? So I think in this line, I really agree, the structure. And also the group think. Those people among the international organization village, okay, they have the similar discipline, similar way of thinking, and similar bureaucratic procedures. So that's the reason why we need certain competition among those. So you mentioned those in the organizational structure were invented or designed many years ago. So the technology-wise, big change have occurred. And geographical-wise, so many new emerging countries are joining. So we have to think about the organization itself. I think, I dare to say, the goal is simple, relatively public organization compared with private organization. This is my reaction. Of course, those is probably the too simple way of thinking, but we have to change the structure of the decision-making of public sectors. Even in government, too, we can see there's so many waste, so many redundancy, and so that's my,
Okay,
first
so
reaction.
what is your reaction to his reaction?
So then I kind of agree with you. I think these organizations were designed, 70, 80 years ago, right? So we are like in a completely different world, and they need to be redesigned. I think I know how provocative when you say it, like, we have to stop the war, we have to stop the pandemic. How do you, I don't think there's any to argue about that. But it would be a little bit simplistic, and I'm sure that you agree. I'm sure you agree to think, like, 194 states get together, and so I think we need more important structure, more complex structures in order to address that. All right, because the problem exists, and even with respect to the pandemic, some states would not consider the pandemic as something very, very relevant. I remember, and also in this very surprising environment we live. We have the pleasure, the luck to live in Switzerland, and we have this small house which is on a ski resort between Switzerland and France. So we live like really on the border, right, during the winter. And Swiss people, for some reason, decided to keep the ski running. So the ski resorts were open on our side, and you just look on the other side of the slope, everything is closed, and you see actually people coming from France, right, in order to ski in Switzerland. And we understand, like, how this simple problem could not be addressed in the same way by two neighboring countries, that is, two countries that should have like a very similar understanding of what the problem is, with this neglecting this idea that people from France would come to Switzerland to ski. If you actually think, and the ski resort in France being closed. Like, this is like how we live in a world which is very interconnected, and then we have to take care of this. This is not necessarily simple problems.
Yeah, well, this is getting very, very interesting. So, I mean, we are talking about two different, arena of complexity and simplicity, right? One is the objective, and the other is structure or the composition of the members, right? So, even if we take this point of view from Professor Yonekura, that actually WHO's mission during the pandemic could have been an easier one, stop the pandemic, right? But still, you have this 193, 94 member countries and all that with probably different structure and governance and everything else. What is your view of, taking this simplistic idea of just stopping the pandemic? Why did it take, such a massive effort for the WHO to organize themselves?
My view on this, I think it was like different objective, different economics objective, and the difficulty actually put a resolution to them, right? Mm-hmm. We put our country first, and maybe this is the right way to go. Right. And we're like very difficult, to have this thing. Different economic situation, different understanding of what would be like, the repercussion of COVID in that particular situation, and not an adequate response to that. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, this is why maybe this is my way of thinking. I'm a professor of finance. Maybe I just I reduce it a little bit, but it was really truly different economic objectives, different incentives.
Yeah, I think many of us remember, because all those living in Japan would remember the fact that, for example, in the early phase of the pandemic, the Scandinavian reaction to the pandemic was very, very different from the Japanese reaction. Japanese reaction was like, okay, save lives no matter what. And then the Scandinavian approach was different. That came from the complexity of the member, but also the difference of the member states, correct?
Diversity.
Diversity.
Yes, and also for innovation, we have to encourage the experiments and trials, okay? In order to avoid those things, nothing happened. So I believe this is a quite good example. Scandinavian people, okay, I dare to say, let them die. But in Japan, we have to protect everybody. And a different way, but in the long run, we will learn, okay, what kind of reaction or correspondent will be effective or not. But no, how do you say, no gobu shugi, particularly the international organization, the UN, there must be no, experiment. Okay, there must be no wrong decision. But no wrong decision in this complex world, nothing happens. So I believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how to design the new structure. So we shouldn't be hesitant to do so. Am I so simplistic?
No.
Sabo, you talked earlier about this complexity of WHO, and from your perspective, what functioned very well with the particular set of governance structure at WHO in the pandemic, and what didn't?
So I think it's easier to point out what didn't work very well.
Yes.
Right, and what didn't work very well. And coming back to what we could have learned from the private sector is, first of all, they don't have committees.
They don't have
right?
committees. Okay.
And that would be like a really nice addition to have it. Like, out of these 34 members, being able to, instead of having like very complex discussions and very high-level discussions, only twice a year.
That's
so you
right.
understand that
That's right.
this is not best practice.
And you said that the efficient board of director in the private sector is actually 9 people, right?
This is the average.
That is the average.
And what we know is that, at least with respect to financial performance, the higher the number of people in the board, the lower is the financial performance.
Right.
Now, once again, I'm assuming that financial performance is the only thing that is driving all this. But let's say, suppose that in a company, this is the only thing that drives this. That basically says that the higher number of people makes the decision less focused and less efficient.
Right.
So to some extent, and unsurprisingly, I work with other board. There was another board, and I'm part of this advisory board. We are 37 people.
37 people.
Okay, it's an international organization based in Geneva.
Right.
Now, you understand, how complex the discussions are, how long they are. Sometimes I have the impression that we talk just because we want to make a point that we said something, rather than we say something which is relevant, which is really adding value.
Right.
How many good decisions? Well, how many decisions can we make in a situation like this? And we know. So my point is, we know that if you have a precise goal, a higher number of people does not necessarily mean a better decision or a quicker decision or a more efficient decision. So if that is the case, why do we keep, thinking about, why do we innovate, as you would say, right?
The question is, who can change the structure? For me, it's not so difficult to install the committee system. Okay, pick up the 7 or 8 people from the 39 or 37 executives to create the decision-making organ. So it's impossible for WHO by itself to make a change or reform.
As it is, it is difficult. As it is, it is difficult.
Who can change?
No, I think we can change. I think
we can change.
But
okay.
it's not an obvious problem. This is what I'm saying. It's not an obvious problem to solve, right?
And from your experience, you said that you are part of a committee with 35 or 37 people, right? And then you think that this is a bad idea from your empirical and academic experience, right? But still, this system or this structure goes on, and it's difficult to change.
It can be changed, right?
I think so. It could be changed. There's very difficult political resistance to change it. I think countries want to have something to say.
Yeah.
All right. Or maybe they don't want to have something to say, but they want to pretend that they have something to say. And this is the difficult part, I think. This is the difficult situation. Yeah.
I want to ask Professor Yonekura, because in Japan we have gone through this governance reform in the last decade or so, and there has been a massive reform in the governance structure, the number of people in the board, and also external members and all that. Could you maybe share with us your insight about how it was possible and what kind of positive or negative effect it is creating?
This is the pressure from financial world. Japan has to invite external executives to govern. And why? Because of the last 20 years, the financial performance of Japanese companies are so bad and so low of the returning ratio. So this is quite easy, but when we look at the UN or public organization, their financial structure is not so good, not so effective. So from the taxpayers' point of view, we have to, we can't put the pressure on the reform. But I couldn't came up with the idea who can be, but the taxpayers, I believe. So that's the reason why U.S. Government tried to withdraw their responsibility. This kind of, you know, how do you say, the database, なんだっけ, database decision making, or as a financial, you know, the performance judgment must be done by somebody. I cannot figure out who it's going to be, but is any, so you financial, you know, the analysis on the public sectors, but UN or global public sector's financial performance?
Yeah, so maybe if I could rephrase Professor Yonekura's point. In fact, in the Japanese corporate governance arena, you had the pressure from the financial market, and then the government heard it, and the government installed some rules and protocols and all that, and the company had to follow. And then the financial performance, these companies improved. So that was a sort of virtuous cycle. In the case of international organization and other public sector, that kind of pressure, where is it, or how does it work?
So I don't think we have the equivalent of that thing. Financial markets are very powerful, and at least from my point of view, they have this ability to actually getting all this information together, right? I think this is one function of the financial market, is one of getting information and analyzes information and resolving information. So we have a pretty good idea of what the market thinks. If you actually think, like, in the last moments in this very interesting political setting, with respect to the Trump administration, there were only two institutions that basically were able to tell Trump what we really thought. One was the market. The market was independently of what the Trump administration would say. The market would react exactly as it should. And the other one, and I'm a little bit sorry to say, it was Harvard University, right? That to some extent, it was the only one say, like, you cannot really do that. And and we don't have this. We have public sentiment, but it's not the same strength of financial markets, right? Financial markets, we vote with our money. I would say that, with public sentiment a little bit less, right? So this is what is missing. This is this sense of accountability that it's always present in financial markets, is a little bit less present.
But besides the financial market, I do not like Mr. Trump as a person, but sometimes he does might be right. He withdraw the financial aid to the global warming, all those things. At least the administration, also largest contributor, make a voice, okay, to do so. So there are some countries, the person who in charge of the international matter have to raise a voice, okay, by doing some withdrawal the money or withdrawal their right to do so or something. And I think the each country has to have the action to reform the international organization. So the way the Trump administration is not so good, but the return of investment, we have to pay more attention, even in the private sectors. Is it possible? Yeah. And Japanese government should do something.
I think maybe we should be more vocal. Yes, I think we should be more vocal. At least if there's something about the Trump administration, they're very decisive. Like, it's not sure about the decisions, but, they're very, very clear about, what they think.
So in a way, in case of an international organization, the member state could be more vocal about the direction of the international organization, the way it governs and it directs themselves. But let's go back a little bit to the private sector discussion, if I may. And what we're facing, and we had this discussion about the financial market putting pressure on the governance, and the governance has improved, etc. Right? At the same time, we're talking about peace, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about innovation is, of course, a very, very important agenda. At the same time, innovation kind of, informs the profit and profit-seeking opportunities, correct? But sustainability and education or health of citizens, etc., these are the different agenda who do not necessarily align with the profit-seeking behavior, right? And we are in this phase of having to kind of integrate these concepts or these goals into the organizational governance of the corporate sectors. What are your views on where we are now and where we're going?
It really depends on the scope of the time, and the innovation sometimes it takes a longer time, but necessary. And the short-term profit seeking also includes the innovation behavior, but the important point is the too much pressure from the financial sectors, the companies try to very short-term result. So in this line, we have to be very careful about the public organization and innovation, but how to make a balance between the innovative, based on the profit-seeking in innovation and long-term result. In the short term, it would be very dangerous to pursue only short-term the result. I agree. So this is also the matter of governance. Okay,
right.
How to.
Salvo, your reaction to this question, please.
Once again, I think when we talk about private companies, we have a simpler set of objectives. And maybe it's not the objective, maybe the stakeholders a little bit simpler. Okay, let me put the stakeholders a little bit simpler. It's we enter in companies with one objective and one objective only, kind of, and we're able to pursue that one. With public organizations, they come, maybe if there's something that can be done, like instead of talking about World Health Organization, make it smaller, right? If you cannot have institutions become bigger and up to the bigger task, maybe making smaller institutions. That also smaller institutions in terms of the objectives that they pursue. All right, if it's not about the World Health Organization, maybe making smaller, cancer, or something which is related to that. That is going to be putting more focus on the organizations and maybe also on the quality of the discussions that can be done. So if we can make the people bigger, just make the organization smaller, so actually to fit the objective.
I had a chance to study a little bit about several companies in Kyoto. And some of them has history of 700 years or 500 years or something like that. They are not listed on the stock market, but they have survived all these years, generations after generations after generations. So probably the goal was very different from short-term profit making, probably a long-term sustainability of the company, etc. So earlier, Professor Yonekura, you raised about the different types of capitalism in different countries and all that, but we also have different types of companies, and maybe, in countries like Japan, we have, very different segments of companies with different time sets and different ideas about the, like how to please the different multi-stakeholders. And first, I would like to hear from Professor Yonekura about your observation about the variety of the multi-stakeholder capitalism within our country. And then next, I would like to hear from Salvo your reaction or your observation about that. Thank you.
So variety is quite important, but varieties or diversities really depends on stakeholders. If stakeholders choose this kind of variety or this kind of company philosophy or mission, they vote means they buy the stocks, right? So in this line, they're very simple, the private sectors. The stakeholders, so buy or not, support. And then now, compared with before, the many people talking about purpose, mission, value. Those are different, the statement from money, profit. Okay. So if the stakeholders means the financial institute or individuals prefer this mission, this state value, will buy. And so in this line, it depends on our choice. This is a very democratic world, but when we look at the international public organization like I dare to say like a UN, a WHO, why is it possible for them to give us a choice? This is a difficult dimension of the question. But at least I want to say that diversity in those organizations is, I think, very low. So as I mentioned, I do not like the Mr. Elon Musk in person, but the idea is quite, interesting and challenging. Okay, in the U.S. government, huge, waste. Okay, huge loss, and same as the UN or international organization. So they have to bring the diversified personnel or people into their community. This is the same.
Salvo, on the Shinkansen ride yesterday, we were talking about different things, but you said that Japan, you don't like this narrative that Japan is lost 3 decades. Japan has lost 3 decades. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure.
In relation to this discussion about the governance.
Yeah. With respect to governance, let me add something and then I'll come back to your point. I think you said that you went to Kyoto, is that right, Osaka? Yeah. And you saw these companies have been there for generations and generations. Yeah. And I think this is the point. The point I want to make is that the one that you see are small fractions of all these corporations that were there 700 years ago, right? And for some reason, they survived. Yes. And they survived most likely because of innovation, because of changing of the environment, being able to adapt to the environment, and so on. The institutions that we see, like the UN and the others, are institutions were created 7 years ago, I don't remember when, and they were fundamentally the same, right? So there was no way for them to grow with the time. The market was very clear to say, they are company, we like your products, we support you. This other company, not very much, we don't support you, right? And that was like a little bit, what this Darwinism actually happens in business, right? We don't have this for all these large organizations. And this is why I think I agree with you. There will be more innovation, more ability to let these organizations grow with the time, because we don't see that, all right? And this is why also we need different governance structure, right? Coming back, and maybe it is something we can still learn. They can still learn from private organization. And regarding the other question was, every time I come to Japan, I hear about this 30 years lost, and this is such the narrative that I don't like. I don't like at all. What I see is like a society which is beautiful, a society which is rich, full of beautiful values. And so maybe you spend 3 decades to bring everybody with you, all right? And this is something which is per se something valuable, something to be honored, right? So as a company, maybe you want to make the maximum profits. As a society, you want to bring everybody with you. I think this is what you achieved in Japan, and I'm not sure this has been achieved in many other countries in the world. So this idea of per se losing 30 years, I don't think it's a good narrative. I don't think it basically shows what is going on. I don't know if you agree on this, but
Professor YONEKURA, what is your view on this?
Yes, one of the safest and richest the country we are in now, but problem is the society itself aging. It is very hard to maintain the power of Japan, and we have to do something for the next 3 decades, how we can survive. So last 30 years was okay. I think we lost, but the loss means then eating up the past and accumulation. But we have to create the next, the accumulation for the future. This is a big problem. And also the Europe and Korea, even China are aging. They're totally different. We lived on population bonus time, and many except Africa or India, developed countries are facing, population onus. So we have to change the way of accumulation of wealth or the stimulation for innovation. We have to change in this line. But so far, as you mentioned, we are okay. So I dare to say that's a problem. Many people feel we are okay. But for the next 3 decades, I dare to say we are not okay. In this line, now is okay. But when we look at Italy, God, last 100 years, you're okay. How do you think about Italy?
Maybe a discussion for different panel.
Okay, different time.
Yes.
But I found this quite important, the evolutionary theory again for a public organization. Okay, the companies, private companies, have to change in order to adapt the change outside. So, like Darwin mentioned, but this is the same for large organization in public sectors. So UN has to change, WHO has to change, maybe so many international organizations have to change to adapt the new reality. In this line, the very educational discussion we have.
If I could ask you, we can have, how do you call that, bilateral learning. Probably private sector could learn from the public sector or the international organization and vice versa, right? From a point of view, what can the private sector learn from the international organizations, and what can the international organization learn from the private sectors?
I think from the private sector, we really should learn how to deal less focused discussions. Let's say it's just a couple of years that we talk more and more about sustainability, about ESG. And I think I mentioned before, just adding one dimension to the problem, right? How much more complex, how much more full of different interpretation of the same concept we have. So this is something that we're not very good. And you actually see the different schools, right? The US seems to be much more, especially now, much more still pushing the agenda without any sort of concern about sustainability in ESG, at least what it looks like, and how much simpler the structures are, and how much more decisive decision-making is. Right. And then you come to Europe, where it seems like, this ESG sustainability seems to be like much more considered in boards and in the public, so to speak, and how much more difficult the discussion is, how much more complex the decision-making is, and also that the structures that we are putting in place seems to be heavier just by adding one item to the objective, so to speak, right? Public organization seems to be, well, generally speaking, with much more complex set of goals and stakeholders. And with all the difficulties that we both agreed, we all agree they have, seems to be able to actually solve and dissolve the trade-off in a much more positive way, much more effective way. Public corporations, public organizations, I think this is what I meant. There are a couple of things. The structure of the board needs to be simplified. The decision-making needs to be simplified. And we know, we have some sort of dictates from the private sector. So the point is study and be able to actually look at them and try to apply.
Salvo, in Japan, we hear a lot about USA. We try to learn a lot from USA, or we try to sometimes criticize USA very, very much. But you are Italian. You live in Switzerland. You work a lot with the European corporations. Could you please put a little bit more perspective on the European business reaction to the current situation? Like we have a huge setback of the sustainability agenda in the recent years, especially in the automotive industry, right? So, and then what is from your point of view happening in the European corporate sector when it comes to integrating several different agendas, including sustainability and geopolitical challenges?
So two different things, right? Two different things. I think we have been more proactive on the sustainability, and the push was very much for the northern countries in which some of these instances are very much part of their way of thinking. Now, I'm unfortunate, the more you go south, and by the way, I'm from Sicily, so I'm as south as you can go in that particular thing, the less this seems to be, well taken. But still, this is a continuous effort of trying to put this into our regulation and our way of managing. With respect to the new administration in the US, is much more wait and see what happens, right? Wait and see what happens, which is normal. When volatility spikes, and this is exactly what we're saying now, the option to defer, the option to wait becomes more valuable. So in this respect, I think European companies are trying to understand where this is going to go, and it's not obvious, right? This idea that first some tariffs are included just to be rejected a couple of days, if not a couple of hours later. So we are just basically trying to say let's wait and think and wait what is going to be happening next. And I think this is not just the reaction of European companies, but I think it's been the reaction of world leaders. Let's see where this is going to go next, because it's not absolutely obvious.
So Professor Yonekura, same question once again. What public sector can learn from private sector, and what private sector should learn from the public sector or international organizations, please?
I think the private sectors should learn how to, manage the long-term goal. And also not only for one company, but for the society as a whole. And this is I believe the kind of, the shared value in the long term, profitable. In the short term, but how to, persuade the stakeholders, the short term, some suffering for a long term, This is in this line, the role of top managers or top management is more important than before. And then this line that we have to learn to manage the complexity and also long-term orientation. But the public sector has to learn the totally opposite, profitability, efficiency, effectiveness, return on investment. So after this discussion, I realized how the private or public sectors are facing a similar problem. And so many things we can learn each other. It's a very interesting point we are now. So it's a dangerous we have to mix up. Some people say long-term, the private sector is the short-term profit is more important something. But what is our mission, our goal, and how to? I like the word SDGs, sustainable development. How we define the sustainable development, both sides. So I've learned so many things we can learn each other of the private sectors. Mutual learning point. It's open the floor.
I'm okay.
Okay. Yeah. So it's very, very challenging, of course. I shouldn't even try to summarize such a complex discussion. But we have such a diversity in terms of the goals and objectives of organizations and the priorities, and then this idea that another element would add exponentially the complexity of decision making. And also, but there are some empirical and academic researches on the effective way of governance in terms of the number of people, the effective number of committee, etc., which could be applied with some political and organizational effort, of course, to improve the quote-unquote effectiveness or efficiency of these organizations. And just to end, final remarks from both of you, right? If there are any, like business leaders in the audience, what would be the one thing that you would tell them?
Maybe my message is more like for non-business leaders. Yeah, if it's okay. Every time, and I do talk with many people in the private sector, but also a lot of people in public organizations. And whenever I talk to them, I have this beautiful feeling of understanding that they think that they are invested with this very important topic and with this higher level of goals. And to some extent, they almost feel, if not ashamed, but a little bit reluctant to look at private companies and try to learn from them. The idea is like, we are doing something which is a bit higher level of integrity and level of standard. Yeah. And I think this is correct up to some point. There are plenty of things that can be learned. Yeah. There are plenty of governance rules that we apply routinely in private companies. It would be a shame not to look at them and at least revise them in public companies. It would be a shame not to do that. So I really invite all of you guys that are here with that, look at them, try to understand what could work, try to make your experiments. Maybe you cannot apply them one-to-one to your organizations, but I'm sure there's a lot of things that, we have strong feedback that are something that really works, and maybe you can apply to your sector as well.
For business leaders, this is your time. I think your role, business leader's role, is more important than ever. And in which way? And then you have to think about the short term, the profitability, also the long term goal, the sustainable development goal. And so it's in the short term, there must be some contradictions, so many problems, but how to conquer those short-term problem for the future. And also I'd like to emphasize upon there is only one answer. Okay, could be many prototype and many experiments there be, and so business leaders can, ask their stakeholders, their vision, mission, okay, and to be chosen. It's impossible for this complex world to chosen by everybody. But how to give the choice and how to be chosen certain stakeholders who, have the sympathy for the goal, vision, mission.
Excellent. Let me close this session by thanking the audience and also thanking the two excellent speakers, Professor Yonekura and my colleague Salvatore CANTALE. Thank you very much, everyone. ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
YONEKURA.
Professor Yonekura, Professor CANTALE, and Professor Takatsu, thank you very much.